There are few movies in Hollywood history that are as famous as Gone with the Wind. Released in 1939, it won multiple Academy Awards, became one of the most successful films ever made, and remains to be one of the defining epics in cinema history. But over 80 years later, a question remains. Is Gone with the Wind actually a great movie? Or is it simply a movie that is famous because it is old and important? Well, after watching it, I think the answer is a little more complicated than either side wants to admit. Because Gone with the Wind is simultaneously one of the most impressive achievements in filmmaking history, and a movie with some very real flaws that are impossible to ignore. So let's talk about what works, what doesn't, and whether this legendary classic still deserves the reputation, the good. Let's start with the obvious. The movie is absolutely gorgeous. Even today, the production values are astonishing. The costumes, the massive sets, the cinematography, the use of Technicolor, everything feels enormous. There are shots in this film that still look better than scenes from films made decades later. The burning of Atlanta remains one of the most visually impressive sequences ever put on screen. The scale feels real because so much of it was actually real. Instead of relying on digital effects, the filmmakers created giant practical scenes that still have impact today. You can criticize the story, the themes, or the pacing, but it's hard not to be impressed by the craftsmanship. And speaking of craftsmanship, the performances are excellent. Vivien Leigh absolutely carries this movie. Scarlett O'Hara could have easily become an unlikable character. She's selfish, manipulative, stubborn, and often makes terrible decisions. Yet Leigh somehow keeps Scarlett fascinating. You may not always like her, but you almost always want to see what she'll do next. That's not easy. Many protagonists are designed to be heroic. Scarlett isn't. She's messy, flawed, and often her worst enemy. And that's what makes her compelling. Clark Gable also delivers exactly what audiences expect from Rhett Butler. He's charming, confident, sarcastic, and endlessly entertaining, even when the story slows down. Rhett's presence helps keep scenes engaging. The chemistry between Gable and Leigh is one of the film's strongest assets. Their relationship is often toxic, frustrating, and destructive, but it's never boring. You understand why these two characters are drawn to each other, even when they're making each other miserable. Another thing that works surprisingly well is Scarlett's character arc. The Civil War serves as the backdrop, but the real story is about survival. Scarlett starts as a spoiled young woman whose biggest concern is romance and social status. Then her entire world collapses. Throughout the film, she becomes tougher, harder, and more ruthless. The movie isn't simply showing historical events. It's showing how these events transform a person. That's where much of the emotional power comes from. The score deserves special mention. Max Steiner's music is legendary for a reason. It gives the film a grand, sweeping quality that helps sell the epic scale. Many classic films have memorable music. Gone with the Wind has music that feels inseparable from the film. When people think of old Hollywood epics, This is often the sound they imagine. Now, let's talk about the issues. And the biggest one is impossible to avoid. Gone with the Wind presents a highly romanticized version of the American South. The film was adapted from a novel that viewed the Confederacy through a nostalgic lens, and that perspective remains throughout the movie. The realities of slavery are either minimized or largely ignored. Many characters look back on the old Southern system with longing and affection. Modern audiences will understandably find this uncomfortable, and honestly, they should. Historical epics don't have to perfectly reflect modern values, but it's fair to criticize a movie when it presents an idealized version of a society built on slavery. That doesn't mean that the film has no artistic value, though. It simply means viewers should recognize the limitations of its perspective. A second issue is the pacing. The movie is nearly 4 hours long, and you feel it. There are stretches that move briskly and keep your attention. Then there are stretches that feel repetitive. The film spends a tremendous amount of time cycling through Scarlett's romantic obsessions. Some scenes could have been trimmed without losing much. The first half generally moves better than the second. By the final act, the movie occasionally feels like it's struggling to end. Another criticism is that several supporting characters don't receive enough depth. Ashley Wilkes is supposed to be the great love of Scarlett's life, but honestly, he's one of the least interesting characters in the film. The audience spends years watching Scarlett obsess over him, yet Ashley himself often feels passive and bland. Sometimes it's difficult to understand why she's so obsessed with him beyond the fact that she can't have him. That may be intentional. The movie may actually be showing how Scarlett falls in love with an idolized fantasy rather than a real person, but it still makes Ashley less compelling than Rhett. And finally, some of the melodrama can feel excessive by modern standards. Classic Hollywood often embraced larger than life emotions. For audiences in 1939, that worked perfectly. Today's viewers may occasionally find the emotional swings a little bit overwhelming. Whether that's a flaw or simply a difference in filmmaking styles depends on personal taste. So does Gone with the Wind deserve its legendary reputation? I think the answer is yes, but with important qualifications. As a filmmaking achievement, it's extraordinary. The visuals, the performances, music, and sheer ambition are remarkable even today. Scarlett O'Hara remains one of cinema's most memorable characters, and Vivien Leigh delivers a performance worthy of all the praise it receives. At the same time, the film's romanticized portrayal of the Old South deserves criticism. Its pacing can be uneven. Some characters are underdeveloped, and its perspective on history is far from objective. Both things can be true. Gone with the Wind can be an influential masterpiece and a flawed movie. In fact, that's probably the most honest way to view it. It's not a perfect film, it's not beyond criticism, but it's also much more than a historical artifact. It's a fascinating piece of cinema history that still contains incredible filmmaking and powerful performances. Whether you end up loving it or not, it's easy to understand why people are still talking about it more than 80 years later. So, my final verdict on this film, it's a pretty enjoyable film. The acting is just great. The line delivery is really good. A lot of the lines are very memorable. I'm sure we all remember the lines like,
"Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn."
After all, tomorrow is another day. Fiddly-dee. Wah, wah, wah.
Although you need kissing badly. That's what's wrong with you. You should be kissed and often.
And by someone who knows how.
And yes, a lot of sections in the film might be a little dated, and a lot of modern viewers may find it offensive, but you have to understand it's trying to represent a certain point in American history that slavery was still popular and it was still going on at this point. It was culturally accepted, but people were still trying to move forward to eventually getting rid of it in history. Well, that was Gone with the Wind, a great classic, a movie that you can watch with your whole family, a movie that's very enjoyable, and those are my opinions on the film, and catch you next time.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G. Snoop Dogg.